Hi guys, Forgotten Wolf here, and this is the Life of Ned Stark and the 50k views special. I seriously cannot thank you guys enough for this, and for 500 likes as well. I could not have done this without you. Thank you guys so much for all of this, for helping me on my journey with this channel. And let's begin. Ned Stark was born to House Stark of Winterfell, to Lyanna Stark and Lord Rickard Karstark. And in the books, Ned was born in 263 AC, but the show aged him up, meaning he was born in the show context in 256 AC. Ned had one older brother, Brandon Stark, and two younger siblings, a sister named Lyanna Stark and a brother named Benjen Stark. There was not known about Ned's life from ages 1 to 8. However, at age 8 in 264 AC, yeah, I'm using the show timeline, Ned Stark was sent to foster at the Vale, serving as ward to Lord Jon Arryn. Ned Stark would meet Robert Baratheon there, who was also at the Vale to serve as ward to Jon Arryn. Ned Stark would serve as ward there for a long time until he would leave the Vale in 282 AC. Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon would go really, really close, with the two viewing each other as brothers practically over time, when Jon Arryn as a second father to them. During these years, Robert Baratheon would grow in love with Ned's sister, Lyanna Stark, and Robert would be betrothed to Lyanna eventually. While we don't know the date Robert and Lyanna were promised to each other, we do know in 276 AC, Ned's older brother Brandon would be promised to Catelyn Tully of Riverrun. Ned himself would also see suitors looking for their daughters to marry as Starks, and being Lord Rickard Ryswell, that's pronounced correct, wanted to promise his daughter Barbary to Ned Stark. This proposal was rejected by Lord Rickard. Ned would marry for the rest of his time in the Vale, but in the next few years, everything would change for Ned Stark. In 282 AC, Ned Stark would see his family again, as there was a huge tourney in Harrenhal, the Tourney of Harrenhal. Now, this is infamous, and I'll get to it in a little bit. Ned would enjoy his time there, as would everyone, until after Rhaegar Targaryen won the tourney, where he, keep in mind, he was married to Elia Martell of Dorne. He would crown Lyanna as Queen of Love and Beauty for that day, which would anger the Starks and Robert Baratheon, and was a scandalous act. Now, Ned would return to the Vale after the tourney, but Brandon Stark was to be married to Catelyn Tully, and he was already in Riverrun when Lyanna Stark, who was traveling with the wedding party behind him, would go missing. It was then reported that Rhaegar Targaryen had kidnapped her and, well, RAPD her. I'm not trying to get this video taken down for that. Rhaegar would also disappear after this. Brandon would be furious, and the angered wolf, or the wild wolf, left Riverrun, and he would go to King's Landing, where he would shout for Rhaegar to come out and die. Brandon would be imprisoned by King Aerys, as obviously threatening the crown prince is not allowed. And Rickard Stark would be summoned to the capital to answer for Brandon's crimes. Rickard would demand a trial by combat, and Aerys honored that request by burning him alive with fire, while Brandon strangled himself to death. Now, this was the final straw for many people, as they considered him mad, and this also meant that Ned Stark was now Lord of Winterfell, but King Aerys would demand the heads of Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark, and Jon Arryn would defy this and declare war against the Targaryens, and he would be supported by the North and the Stormlands. Ned and Robert would return home to the North and Stormlands, where they would call their own banners, instead of having their brothers do it for them. Ned would go off to war with Robert Baratheon and Jon Arryn, where he would leave Benjen Stark in Winterfell, since a Stark must always be in Winterfell. The rebels would get off to a great start, but after the Battle of the Bells in 283 AC, Jon Arryn began to negotiate for the Tullys to join Robert's rebellion, and in order to get them to join, Ned Stark would agree to marry Catelyn Tully in place of his older brother Brandon. In addition, Jon Arryn would agree to marry Lysa Tully, and the weddings would take place in 283 AC. Catelyn Tully would become Catelyn Stark, marrying Ned Stark, and Lysa Tully would become Lysa Arryn, marrying Jon Arryn. Ned and Catelyn would only spend 2 weeks together in Riverrun, and in that time, Catelyn Stark would become pregnant with the couple's first child. Ned would go off to war, and he would battle in the Battle of the Trident, which was a brutal battle where Robert Baratheon would kill Rhaegar Targaryen in the battle, which Robert described as that's where he got his crown at. Then Robert sent Ned to capture King's Landing for him since Robert was injured, and when Ned got there, he saw the Lannisters had sacked the city, which was, according to many accounts, like Jorah Mormont and Ned Stark, horrifying. But when Ned walked into the throne room, he saw Jaime Lannister sitting on the throne, and he had killed the Mad King, and Ned called him Kingslayer, a name that would live in infamy for years. Robert would disagree with Ned over Jaime's punishment, and the actions of Tywin Lannister's bannerman Gregor Clegane, so Robert sent Ned down to Dorne to get Lyanna Stark from the Tower of Joy. Ned would find Lyanna Stark in the Tower of Joy after killing Sir Arthur Dayne and helped to kill the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Gerald Hightower. And in the Tower of Joy, Ned would find Lyanna where she was dying with a baby in her arms. The boy's name was Aegon Targaryen, as Lyanna and Rhaegar had secretly married, and they ran away together. Lyanna requested that Ned raise the boy up and keep him safe, and this was Lyanna's last request before she died. Now, Ned would not speak a word of this to anyone his entire life, but when Ned got back to King's Landing and told Robert, this reconciled them. And Ned would then go back to Riverrun to pick up his wife, Catelyn, and bring her back to Winterfell. There, Catelyn would present Ned with his heir, Robb Stark, a son, and Ned would present Catelyn with Jon Snow, who he raised as his bastard, and Catelyn wouldn't be happy with Jon and hated him throughout Jon's whole childhood. And when Ned got back, Benjen informed Ned that he was joining the Night's Watch. The next 4 years after Robert's rebellion was full of peace and recovery across Westeros, but for Ned Stark, it was a happy time, living at home with his wife and son, watching his son grow up. And in 286 AC, Catelyn Stark would become pregnant with her and Ned's second child, and Catelyn would give birth in 286 AC to Sansa Stark, Ned Stark's eldest daughter. Catelyn would then become pregnant again in 288 AC 2 years later, and Ned and Catelyn would welcome their third child, Arya Stark, their younger daughter. 1 year later, Greyjoy's rebellion would break out. Go check out my video on Greyjoy's rebellion if you want a more detailed account of that war. Before leaving to go off to war with Robert again, Catelyn requested that Ned not bring home another son or kid like he did with the last war when he went off with Robert Baratheon. And also, Catelyn had become pregnant with the couple's fourth child, so that might have played a factor. Ned would help Robert to crush the Balon Greyjoy and the Greyjoys in Greyjoy's rebellion, with Balon Greyjoy hating him for many years to come. But in the peace negotiations, Ned would suggest that he take Theon Greyjoy on as a ward, which was accepted, and raise him up as an honorable man. Yeah, that didn't happen. For those of you who've seen the show or read the books, that didn't fucking happen. Ned would return home with Theon, and Catelyn, who was displaced with Ned because of this, would present him with a fourth child, a son, Brandon Stark, in 289 AC. Once again, a repeat of history. Theon served the Starks well as the Starks' wards, and was great friends with Robb Stark and Jon Snow when they were growing up together. And the next years were very peaceful, and in 293 AC, Ned and Catelyn would welcome their final child, a boy named Rickon Stark. The next year were full of more of the same until 297 AC, where Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, would die of poison, although it was disguised as an illness. Lysa Arryn sent a letter to Ned and Catelyn in Winterfell saying it was the Lannisters who poisoned him. Ned Stark would also welcome King Robert Baratheon to Winterfell. Robert would offer Ned, in exchange for Ned becoming the new Hand of the King, Robert would promise his son Prince Joffrey an heir to the throne to Sansa Stark. Although Catelyn wanted him to stay, Ned's honor demanded that Ned accepted this proposal, and he did. And in the last days of Robert's visit to Winterfell, someone would push Bran out of tower and break his legs. And Ned was furious about the culprit, but the culprit would elude him for a while, as he didn't know who it was. Ned left Winterfell for the last time, spoilers, but along the King's Road, Arya's direwolf Nymeria would bite Prince Joffrey. This would cause Joffrey to not like Sansa, and Arya got Nymeria to run away, but this forced Queen Cersei to demand that Lady Sansa's direwolf to be killed. Ned sadly accepted this request and demanded he do it himself since the wolf was from the north, and Lady sadly died. This also caused Bran to wake from his coma. Ned arrived in King's Landing shortly after, and he quickly realized that he had made a major mistake coming here in the first place. At first, he met Catelyn Stark in secret, where Catelyn would tell him of how it had actually been the Lannisters who pushed Bran out the tower, but Ned needed more evidence to further prove this theory and bring it up to Robert. And around this time, he would go to trust Littlefinger, another bad mistake. However, frequent arguments over what to do about the pregnant Daenerys Targaryen resulted in Ned resigning his hand. Ned would attempt to leave King's Landing, where he would be attacked by Jaime Lannister, and Jaime injured him, forcing him to stay in King's Landing. The reason was because Catelyn had taken Tyrion Lannister prisoner on her way back to Winterfell and Tyrion's way back to King's Landing. And when Ned woke up, arguments happened with Queen Cersei, but Robert silenced them and told Ned they would speak again when Robert returned from their hunt. Ned had gotten back to work, where he discovered Robert's bastard, Gendry. This led him to discovering that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen weren't actually Robert's kids, but instead the kids of Queen Cersei and Jaime Lannister, also meaning that those two were responsible for pushing Bran out the tower in Winterfell. And Ned intended to tell Robert when he got back, and he demanded that Queen Cersei leave with her children, and he actually confronted her about this. Yeah, huge fucking mistake. This led Cersei to arrange for Robert to be killed by a boar. This meant that Joffrey was now king, but Ned got Varys and Littlefinger to rally the city watch to take Joffrey, Cersei, Tommen, and Myrcella hostage. However, Littlefinger betrayed Ned, and Ned was arrested and charged with treason. This meant Robb Stark had to rally the North and leave Winterfell, declaring war on the throne for his father's arrest and wanting his freedom, along with wanting his sisters back. Robb Stark was making slow but sure progress, but not before Catelyn Stark lost Tyrion Lannister in the Vale. And this meant Ned was free to be given his punishment, but Ned also said to Varys, if that, when hearing about Tyrion escaping, if that's true, just cut my throat. He knew that he wasn't leaving King's Landing alive. But this was right before Robb Stark lifted the siege of Riverrun, where he would take Jaime Lannister hostage, which crucially meant the Lannisters couldn't kill Ned Stark. And Cersei arranged for Ned to join the Night's Watch, hoping to allow this to get the Starks to swap Jaime for Ned. And as for Ned's daughters, Arya escaped King's Landing, or at least the Queen's clutches, and Sansa still remained engaged to Joffrey. However, right in front of the Sept of Baelor, Ned was dragged and confessed to the treason falsely. King Joffrey declared that Sir Ilyn Payne bring Ned's head right in front of the city, despite the Queen and Sansa and the rest of the small council begging for Joffrey to reverse the decision. And Ned's head was brought before the city and both of his daughters. Ned Stark, the honorable man, never breaking his oath, would die a traitor, and Ned's own sword chopped his head off, completing the life of Ned Stark.